to A Parent's Guide to Child Development, where we help you optimize your child's development. Today, we'll be discussing the hidden senses with expert Bailey Relford. Bailey Relford is a registered occupational therapist who specializes in child development. She has worked with pediatric populations in acute care, outpatient clinics, early intervention, and public schools. Bailey Relford has been an occupational therapist for over 6 years and is now the owner of Dandelion Occupational Therapy, located in Belton, Texas. Bailey's favorite part about being an occupational therapist is helping kids reach their full potential by empowering their caregivers and making communities more accessible. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited about our conversation today because everybody knows about the first five senses, right?
Yep.
So everything that inputs that comes in through your body, your sight, your sound, smell, taste, and touch. But you're here to tell us that there's not five, there's eight senses. So,
Absolutely.
so tell me about these hidden senses.
Yeah, so like you kind of touched on, we do have the five that everyone talks about that you do in your little, sensory unit in third grade science, which is sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. But we have three extra ones that we call the hidden senses in occupational therapy, and those are called proprioception, vestibular, and interoception. So those are the like medical terminology. I'll break it down a little bit more for those of us who don't have all that background. So proprioception is a fancy way of saying body awareness. We have receptors in every joint in our body, from like the tips of your fingers all the way up to bigger joints like hips and knees, that send signals to your brain that let you know mostly that your body is on the ground, because we're humans and we live on Earth and we like gravity. And so that is something that our brain looks for that feedback from. And then vestibular is actually controlled in the inner ear. We have crystals that float on top of our inner ear fluid, that tell our brain what direction our body is moving in, be that forward, backwards, or rotational. And then interoception is a big umbrella term for senses that honestly are still being researched. But it's everything internally. So be that chemical receptors, stretch receptors, organ systems. It's how the inside of our body is telling our brain what's going on. So this is things like hunger, thirst, heart rate, body temperature, pain, nausea, and all of those things that can get all misconstrued for both adults and especially kiddos.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've known about vestibular because it tells you like where your body is in space.
Mhm.
And the other two not a clue. But it makes
Yeah.
sense, right? Because your body needs the information from your inside of your body to tell your brain what's going on. Because if you didn't have that information coming from your body that you're nauseous or that you're full, then you would just continue to eat until you exploded. So
Exactly. And for a long time, like we understood, think back to like biology and anatomy that a lot of us like healthcare workers take. We understand the mechanisms of how those internal signals are sent to our brain, but it's this relatively new idea that if you are having difficulty with sensory processing, you can also have difficulty with those signals. So sometimes it's a matter of teasing out, is it a medical thing or is it a sensory thing? And we see that a lot, especially in kids, because a lot of those internal sensations can contribute to negative behaviors. Um, and they don't have the communication skills to pair up with, saying I don't feel good or my stomach hurts and stuff like that. So it's really interesting. It's a cool emerging research area.
that's awesome. So how can sensory processing affect regulation? I think you just touched about it. The kids acting out because they don't have a way of understanding what they're feeling and be able to communicate it to parents.
Yeah, so definitely with like interception, we see that, with kids having a difficulty with even like potty training or saying hunger and thirst versus acting out. We know that the chemicals that are triggered and sent out when you are hungry or thirsty can actually target our fight or flight system very similarly to anxiety. So one of the biggest things I always talk about, especially in school-based practice when we have big behaviors, is do kids have regular access to water and snacks? And so, because sometimes that can be a simple way to de-escalate some of our regulation problems. But the other ones, the proprioception and vestibular input, actually have a huge part of regulation for everybody. We all have sensory preferences, and you can see this in adults a lot in the careers we choose.
Mm.
Um, Adults have a lot more autonomy throughout their day, and are you in a desk job or are you a helicopter pilot? Are you a lineman? Are you doing, all this kind of stuff with your hands? Or are you more like, I need a quiet space to read and synthesize all this research, Kids don't have as much autonomy because they're in school and they don't know how to communicate that. And so our senses can help set us up to participate in our daily activities as easily as possible. And so proprioception and vestibular, I kind of talk about those being the good ones to target first with kids who are a little dysregulated. And another piece with that is like how our brain actually develops. So a little bit of a neuroscience nerd out for you is our brain has basically three parts: a brainstem, the limbic system, and the cortex. So all of our sensory processing information is held in the brainstem, which is I've heard people call it I think they call it like the monkey brain or something, but basically
Oh,
like
let's say brain.
evolutionary. Yeah, it's the basis of who we are as like creatures, whereas the cortex and limbic system hold our cognitive process and emotions, which is what differentiates us from like animals. So, or other animals, I should say. And so when there is dysfunction in that brainstem, it kind of works as a gatekeeper to those higher level functions. So if we have sensory dysfunction, we're not going to be able to access emotional regulation or creativity or language or anything that's held up in the cortex until we get our sensory stuff figured out first.
Oh, that's really interesting. So even if you're like communicating with your child who's being very dysregulated and having a meltdown, and you're like, calm down, like they're not, that information isn't even getting to the part of the brain that can control that, because it's just like that primitive part of the brain is being activated and is not allowing any other information to go through.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. And it's hard to think of as an adult because I think a lot of adults come at stuff from that cortex because we're, older and have more life experience, but a lot of our kids are still acting out of that brainstem system.
Yeah, but I also think there's still some adults that that
Yes,
live
I
out of
agree
their
with
own
that
brain. Okay, so how does sensory processing develop across a lifespan?
Yeah, so this is a great question. Like I said earlier, we all have sensory preferences. I would caveat that with also saying we are all always learning about those sensory preferences, because they can change over like your lifespan and you can have different experiences that affect them later on in life. But for the most part, we know that the sensory systems start developing as early as 8 weeks gestational age. So like your sense of touch and stuff like that, they know that in utero that babies have feeling in their face and hands and fingers. So touch is our first sense to develop. It's also our largest organ because it's held in the skin, which is our largest organ. And so we get a lot of information from touch, and that's something to keep in mind. Then we know a little bit more through like functional MRIs and stuff that vision and hearing development can actually peak as early as 4 to 5 months. And not so much that like the way the eyes and the ears are working, but how those the synapses in the brain that help send the messaging, their peak development is around 4 or 5 months, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, because we don't think they're doing a lot at 4 to 5 months, but they are laying that foundation because we have to, again, have those good sensory bases to then move on to things like play skills, cognitive skills, social emotional skills. So that's why we call that the first 3 months after birth the fourth trimester, because it's really like a lot of developmental specialists, and especially as OTs, like we really believe that there's just as much development those first 3 months as we see in utero. And we really need to like have some intentional time there and protect that neonatal experience for both baby and mom and parents and whoever else is around, taking care of them so that we can build those healthy sensory processing skills, if that, and then we can set them up for the best progress moving forward.
It's what people probably don't realize is that the first 3 years of life, the first 1,000 days from birth, is when all the neural connections in the brain, 80% of the brain is created in those first 1,000 days, and sort of like a racing
Crazy.
clock to create those neural connections. And so for parents who are hearing this, then they're probably thinking like, oh my gosh, like what do I need to do? And it's really just creating experiences for your child, right?
Yes.
Creating inputs that create those connections. After 1,000 days, the brain starts pruning the connections that are not being used. So it's really important to give lots and lots of inputs, which doesn't necessarily mean going to like every baby, like baby me or parent and me class that there is.
Right.
There's just things that you can do around the house, like going out to the park, and then like all the inputs that come from there, from the sunlight coming through the leaves, casting shadows, the wind on their skin, seeing like animals and naming them, smelling the flowers, fresh cut grass, crunching of the leaves this time of year. All of those things are like inputs for the kids. And part of the reason for the Fledglings flight is we created over 4,280 play-based exercises. So you're talking about that intentional
Yes.
engagement with the child to create these connections in the brain. So we have over 100 to 200 play-based exercises for each month of life. And in our first month, it's really just about creating sensory experiences for the child because their eyeballs aren't moving, they can't move their head, everything's a reflex at that point. And we have 6 different developmental categories, and one of them is sensory. So we do focus on that. And I feel like in the past, sensory processing has been something that's really been associated with autism.
Mhm.
But I feel like what people are just beginning to understand is that it's important for everybody, right? So
Absolutely.
even people who are not diagnosed with autism can have sensory processing issues. And you said it's the first organ that comes online, or like senses that comes online, and it's the largest organ. And so in our boxes, our customized subscription boxes, the whole thing is really just about creating using different textures and things to touch the skin,
Yes.
different parts of the body, all parts of the body, not just like the hands or the arms, but all just to create those connections in the brain. Um,
Yeah,
and
because it helps with brain mapping and giving the baby an understanding of they have a body. Because initially they just think they're part of mom, really, or whoever's
right,
taking care of them mostly. Um, and stuff like that. I was on your app looking, and one of the things I like too is that when you register, it asks about whether you're term or preterm, which I think is really important to talk about when we talk fourth trimester. If your baby is premature or was premature, we want to adjust that fourth trimester to when they would like adjusted age would be 3 months, right? So if we have a baby who's born a month early, we want to kind of hone in on that time an extra month. You know what I mean? And so I love that you guys asked about that question because we have prematurity, we have trauma, we have, if we have a kiddo who's had some kind of prenatal exposure and maybe they're now in your care through like foster care or kinship care, their sensory systems are going to be at risk and maybe a little bit affected. And then also we know that maternal mental health or caregiver mental health is a big part of that fourth trimester too. Like the stuff you're talking about, like you have to be well, you have to take care of yourself to go and do all that stuff and stay engaged. So I always like to do my little plug for mamas to take care of themselves too in those first, couple months there, because it does matter, really for you, but then also so that you can engage and model those appropriate responses. So
and it's every birth is trauma, even if you have the easiest one, like you just had a bowling ball come out of your body, whether it's through the window or the door, but either way, like there's, and some are more difficult than others. So my son was 6 weeks premature, so I have a lot
So
of experience with
yeah.
prematurity, and also I had a pretty traumatic birth experience as well. So it's, a lot of it, I think women are expected to sort of white knuckle it, right? And
Mhm.
past women would, they talk about women giving birth in the field and then continuing with their working, and it's like not the healthiest
Yes, it is
model.
not a good. No, and I do think that like a lot of like pediatricians and well visits, the way that they're set up, they're meant to catch kids who are really far behind. And so I think as a result, some of this sensory stuff falls through the cracks. Like I remember our son was premature as well, but he was doing really great, like from his motor milestones. And so I remember going into my 3 month well check and them saying, I don't think we need to adjust for prematurity anymore. Like he's fine. And I was like, well, he's not eating, he's not sleeping, and he can't calm himself. And those are all like sensory skills, but like they're not showing up on a well check. So I always like to remind parents of preemies too to like advocate for that, your baby did have less time. So
Yeah.
it's okay to give them extra time outside of the womb if they had less time in utero.
Yeah, it's true. So, but there's a connection also between sensory processing and language development, right?
Right. Yeah. And that is another, language, in my experience, language is something parents really clue into when it comes to development. Like a lot of parents may not even be tipped off that their child may have development issues until 2 or 3 years old because of speech. When really I would say 80 to 90% of them, had I encountered them earlier, I probably could have seen something. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, that well check visit. I think a lot of that stuff kind of falls through the cracks. But the reason that that matters is we have like this pyramid that it kind of looks like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is like you basically the synopsis of that is like you have to be safe and have biological needs met to like move up the pyramid to self-fulfillment, which is what all humans want. But this OT version is kind of the same thing, except for we put sensory processing at the bottom. So we have to have control of our sensory processing skills to then move up to attentional skills, relational skills, language skills, and then eventually into academic, reading, writing, arithmetic, those kind of things. So that's really how I encourage parents, no matter what age I encounter them at when we talk about sensory processing, we usually go way back to the beginning of what we should be doing. So I love that your guys' program is kind of helping educate early to get some of those experiences in, because basically you're building that strong foundation for your kiddos to help them then grow into advanced language skills and relational skills and their motor skills as well.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing too is that, oh gosh, I totally lost my train of thought. So sorry. I was listening to what you're saying. I'm like, oh, I want to say that, and then like, pew, it just all disappeared.
It
Um,
happens. They'll
that
come back.
that's the postmenopausal brain for you. I'll remember sometime after this podcast that what I intended to say. I think it had to do with, oh yes, now I remember what I was going to say. Um, so with Fledglings Flight, the reason that it came to be is that it was during COVID, and then we were in the lockdown crisis. And
Mhm.
so in August of 2020, I realized that when there was a second wave of COVID, like, oh man, this isn't going anywhere, and these lockdowns are going to keep happening, and you can't lock a kid in a house for 2 years and not expect there to be developmental delays, because again, they're not getting those inputs that they need.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a use it or lose it situation. And so there's a sense of urgency to do it. And so the idea behind Fledglings Fly was to get in front of issues, right? So we had experts from vision therapy and pediatric occupational therapy and psychiatrists and occupational therapists and PT, all of which to take the exercises you're already doing in your therapy, but doing them before there's a prognosis. So
Yeah.
my son, premature, he had ended up having vision issues, but we didn't know about it until he was like 9 years old. And there were
Mhm.
things that I could have done when he was a baby that probably would have prevented him from having to go into vision therapy. And so we have these exercises for like, well, first of all, any age is good for it, but to start when their eyes are just learning to track, right? So his issue with
Right,
eyes was he had beautiful vision, but his eyeballs weren't tracking. And
right.
it actually ended up explaining a lot of the things that we watched about him, which is like he was afraid to catch balls. He didn't want to do
Yeah.
ball sports. He was afraid to jump into the ball pit. He didn't have depth perception, but we didn't know
Yeah.
that. We're just like, he's just uncoordinated or he just doesn't like
Right.
sports. Like we didn't know that there was a thing. And so, I felt it was really important to start some of these exercises that we did with them as far as like tracking things, convergence and whatnot, doing them when he's a baby, and that way those ocular muscles get strengthened. So the idea is just to get ahead of everything, and it's not going to cure all issues, but it can
Right.
help mitigate some of it. So
Yeah, I mean, as a country, we definitely have a medical system built around illness
mm,
and rehabilitating skills. And we run these baby play groups right now. We have a big hospital system here where I work, and we get a lot of like physicians, spouses who bring their kids, and the physicians are like, the baby's fine. And it's like, and I'm trying to explain like, yeah, your baby is not sick. Your baby does not have a diagnosis. He's not missing milestones, but that doesn't mean that there's not stuff we can work on in the meantime. And also, like, and maybe you feel this way based on your experience, but as a professional, I feel kind of a calling to present accurate information because I do feel like we're in an age of excess vis-a-vis information, and that I know it's not always accurate. And I feel in some ways trying to de-influence that space of, it's not whatever trend is going to go viral or whatever product some influencer is endorsing. It's like, this is researched. We know it. Like, let's get it in the hands of parents so that they can do what they need to do, but also know that they're doing a great job, and just, like, quell some of that anxiety about catch-up culture and
yeah.
comparison.
Yeah.
So
And the social medias are the worst about that, right? Because you're constantly comparing yourself and the playground's bad enough, like comparing your child's
Mhm.
development to other kids as well. But then when you have it like the idealized world on Instagram and whatnot, and what you're seeing some of these mom influencers doing with their children, and then you're just like, I'm not good enough. My child's
Yeah.
not good enough. And
Yeah.
just terrible for your emotional well-being for sure.
Yeah.
So, how can we develop some sensory processing skills in infants?
Yeah, so we've kind of talked about a few of them. And like, your guys' app has some amazing ideas. The some of the key things I like to do from like occupational therapy specifically, I'm a big fan of infant massage. And this again doesn't you do not have to go to a massage therapist. You do not have to pay hundreds of dollars. There's some really good free information out there about how to work through, like, you can do gas and fussiness massages, but even just putting that lotion on after bath time, it really helps again with the body mapping. We can do some joint compressions where we're just kind of pressing pretty firmly into baby's joints. But that is going to help them build that body awareness piece. And so that can be great. And it's been shown to improve like caregiver relations and stuff like that, and caregiver confidence, which is what we were just talking about. The sensory experiences that you're talking about going outside, um, playing with a lot of different textures, wearing different texture clothes. Like, personally, I love loose fitting cotton clothes. And like, I realized when I was shopping for my kids, like, that's all I bought them. And I was like, wait, am I like passing on that sensory preference? Which, like, whatever if I do. But you could also, I could put them in jeans every once in a while. It won't kill them. And then just that engaged parent to baby like FaceTime. We are all on screens way too much, and we really need some of that quality. Babies need that quality eye contact time, without a parent on a phone. We're seeing just drastic impacts on social development and relational development because of how much time adults are spending on their phones. So that can be really helpful. turning every like bath time, diaper change, when parents come home, when brother and sister come home, like turning all that into an experience. And then also letting them get messy. So I know that can be kind of scary for, I mean, anybody who has a house that doesn't want it to be messy. But also for babies, you know, they put everything in their mouth. So finding some good taste safe sensory play activities. And you know, letting them do it in the bathtub or outside while it's warm enough, um, and just letting them be messy because it's really, really important to let kiddos get messy. As an occupational therapist, I'm always the one making a mess. Like every clinic I've ever worked in, I'm the one like clean up on aisle 3. So
I was thinking, like, when my son was growing up, that I should invent a garbage disposal that goes into the bathtub. So that way, if you're doing like full body messy play, you just hose it down and then put the like garbage disposal on so that it just like whatever chunks are in there just get ground up. And I'm like, I'm a genius.
yeah. No, honestly, I convince a lot of parents to do messy, like when they start solids, to do that in the bathtub because they're so like they don't want to clean up the mess. And I get it, like especially if you have multiple kids and stuff, like, and so I'm like, put them in the bathtub and do the solids in there. So that could work.
Fantastic. So, what are some of your favorite products for infants to help with sensory processing?
So I like I said earlier about de-influencing parenting, I don't usually recommend a lot of products. Like I really like to just tell my parents that the only thing they need is them. We have, you know, all these cool like containers and things that move babies and hush babies and rock them and swing them. And what we're seeing is that if when kiddos spend too much time in those spaces instead of on the floor, we're having, you know, issues with torticollis, head shape, delayed milestones like rolling and stuff because we're having decreased trunk strength. And we're also seeing a lot of retained reflexes, which can lead to vision and behavioral problems in school age children. And then just general decrease like fine motor skills because we don't have the core strength. So I really urge caution for parents. You absolutely need something to cook dinner and do all that. And so go for it then, but limit that time. The American Academy of Pediatrics wants that time under 2 hours a day, and that includes car seats. So I know for those of us who are in bigger cities, that can be a real doozy. Because if we're spending a lot of time in traffic, then, you know, in theory, that would limit some time at home. But other than that, I am a big fan of like Dollar Tree and just going in person, and touching and experiencing stuff when babies are a little bit older, you know, like the 12-month up, like let them go, let them pick stuff out of that dollar section. And, you know, don't get pigeonholed and like I need a toy, so I'm gonna go to the toy section. Like go to the cleaning aisle and look at sponges and go look at loofahs. And I love hair gel in a Ziploc bag. That's like one of my favorite baby like sensory activities. It's hair gel, like old school hair gel is such a unique texture. And so I like to do stuff like that just with what you have around the house. And nothing too hard and too complicated. So that was another thing I noticed with your guys' app was just like some really nice at home and stuff that you probably already have. So that was cool. It does not have to be Pinterest worthy to be
Yeah.
effective.
True. And the thing is that we have everything, all the exercises are designed for things that are in the house. So you shouldn't have
Perfect.
to go anywhere. You should be able just to find things around the house. So we do actually have like a lot for sensory processing, a lot of Ziplocs of putting different things in there, like frozen peas and like getting that finger isolation
Mm,
by like smashing
yes.
peas or like even put like food and then mixing things that you obviously aren't edible like hair gel and
Right.
rice or something that are just like crazy textures. And another thing we love doing is putting things inside of balloons like flour.
Mm,
Different hair gel would feel different, right? You could
yeah.
their lentils and like all of those and doing different kinds of like matching games when they're a little bit older about matching textures like do which two balloons feel like they have the same things inside. And also we have also
Mm,
like using those Easter eggs and putting different things inside, coins in one, rice in another, beans in another, and doing a matching game with sound by shaking them. And we also with the baby jars putting different scented things like nutmeg and
yes. I love.
and matching by smell. So
I
getting,
love the scent jars.
yeah.
People forget about smell, but it's actually the only sense with a direct connection to the brain. So all of our other senses run through that brainstem and kind of get, the brainstem decides what's important and what's not. But our olfactory nerve goes straight from our nose to our brain. So it's actually why smells have such like a strong emotional like memory component because there's nothing to filter them out. So we got to develop that early too.
Hey, I was just about to ask that, but you answered the question for me. Like, is that why? I can, my calming smell, the smell that just
Mhm.
makes me feel is fresh cut grass. And
Mm.
I smell that, I'm like, and I'm not entirely sure why. But then, like, also with the holiday smells too, like, I know that like commercial businesses have really tied into like those the pumpkin spice smell, and they've gone
Yes.
way overboard.
Yes.
And maybe there's like now there's becoming like the opposite reaction to that scent where it's like, oh, it's the holidays too soon. Like how
Yes.
but that also that scent is too like the smell of like mulled wine or pumpkin pie being baked or something
Yes.
also nice. But yeah, anyway. So I know that in my introduction, I talked about you being an occupational therapist, and then you also work with children, and then people are saying, but children don't have occupations. How can you be an occupational therapist for children? So what is an
Yeah.
occupational therapist?
Yeah. So, occupational therapy is based around occupations. It was founded, in the 1920s. So the word occupation just basically meant ways you occupy your time. And that has transformed to across the lifespan. We help people with things that are meaningful to them, and we help them accomplish those activities despite whatever disability or injury or illness they've been working with. And so it's really about helping people reach their potential and helping them engage in things that bring them joy and balance. For kids, this is why I love my job. A child's main occupation is play, and they learn through play. And it's really important for us to be silly and to be fun and to teach kids how to have fun and how to relax and engage in those meaningful occupations so that they're not hardwired just to be accomplishing the next thing to the next thing like little adults. And so we do a lot of play. I also specialize in feeding, which is another child occupation of childhood. And then I do co-treat and work alongside like social workers and speech therapists for some help with relation building and social skills, mostly targeting how sensory processing is affecting someone's ability to engage in language and appropriate social interaction. So I'm kind of all over the place, but that's why I love OT because like it is a healthcare profession. Like I took all the anatomy, biology, and I really liked that stuff. But I also like joke with my husband that I know just a little bit about everything. And so OT was a great profession for me. Like I can do whatever I want at work. Like I can cook, I can do crafts, I can do sports, I can, we can do a play. Like it's so fun. Like you never get bored doing what we do. So, and we need more OTs. So if you don't know what it is and people are interested in it, they can go to aota.org and learn more about schools and programs in their area because it's awesome.
So when do you think that parents should reach out to an OT?
Yeah, I think so. Like I kind of talked about earlier, I feel that we do have to one advocate for our profession. I don't think a lot of people know what we are, and I don't think they know we work with kids. I get a lot of like, so you're a physical therapist, and I'm like, no, not exactly. We do some motor skills, but we also focus on the holistic child. So with littles, with babies, I recommend OT in that fourth trimester period if we've had any kind of trauma or exposure. Prenatal exposure to drugs and alcohol, I would recommend getting at least a consult from an OT. I also, if kids have a lot of tension, like if they were breech or maybe we had to use forceps or vacuum, something like that. We noticed that they kind of are always like this. Come see an OT. And then colicky and reflux babies, like a pediatrician will tell you those are normal, and they are. It is normal, but it doesn't have to be as intolerable as it can be. And seeing an occupational therapist can help you with some of that for those biddies. Um, Moving into like a little bit older kids, if we're noticing they have, like you were saying, difficulty using their eyes to follow toys, they're not reaching for toys, and if they have one side preference, you know, we could be like torticollis or even just some retained reflex kind of stuff. And then if we're having issues again with calming and soothing, like it is normal for babies to cry, but after that 4 month regression, we should see babies able to entertain themselves, start to soothe themselves, enjoy nursing or feeding from the bottle, and consolidating their sleep into like 3 to 6 hour chunks. So if that's not happening, um, you could see an OT to talk about some sensory stuff. And then as we start solids, we do see a lot of sensory stuff with like gagging and refusing textures. That can be a good time to talk to an OT. And then as we get older, like 2 and up, if we're having kind of extreme tantrums, like multiple tantrums a day, longer than 20 minutes, like inconsolable or hurting them, like doing self-harm to self or hurting others, I would say reach out to an OT about some sensory processing. And then I also like to say, like, if you're getting told you need a referral to speech, or PT, just throw in the referral to OT as well. Like, and because we can catch some of the stuff that the other people may be missing. So it never hurts to get an eval and to just get looked at.
Yeah, fantastic. How do people get a hold of you? How do they reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, so I have an Instagram. It's OT Dandelion underscore TX. And then I also have a website, otdandelion.com, which I think are both going to be linked whenever we post this and stuff. And I would love to chat, answer any questions. And I do offer like parent virtual coaching and consulting and stuff, which I can do in a variety of states and stuff like that. So I would love to help anyone out who needs some more advice on this topic.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today and sharing all of your wisdom and expertise with our community. And have an amazing rest of your day.
Yes, you too. Thank you so much for having me.